What is the largest naval battle of antiquity? Welcome to Collapse, where history comes alive and where each video immerses you in the fate of those who shaped the world. Today, prepare to sail towards one of the most decisive battles of antiquity. At the gates of the Ambracian Gulf in 31 before Christ, two worlds clash in a crash of pride and sails, Rome against Rome, Octavian against Antony and Cleopatra. The sea becomes the stage for a titanic confrontation, the Battle of Actium. More than just a naval clash, it's the ultimate breath of the Republic and the first heartbeat of an empire. Yet, despite its capital importance, the event remains shrouded in mystery. Tactics, betrayals, enigmatic choices. What really happened that day off the Greek coast? But before embarking on a new adventure, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss anything. Thank you and bon voyage. Around 40 to 30. Before Christ, the Mediterranean basin is undergoing a phase of profound political and military upheaval. At the center of this Greco-Roman world, the Roman Republic is experiencing its last convulsions. Certainly, the assassination of Julius Caesar, which occurred in 44 before Christ, has left a considerable power vacuum and reignited internal rivalries. His murder is perpetrated during the famous Ides of March, on March 15th, 44 before Christ, in the heart of the Senate, by a group of senators fearing the establishment of an authoritarian monarchy that Caesar seemed to embody. The conspirators, led notably by Brutus and Cassius, claimed to defend Rome's liberty against a potential tyrant. However, by eliminating Caesar, they provoked the political chaos they hoped to avoid. After this major event, the weakened Republic moves a little closer to the brink. Caesar's supporters, called Caesarians, form a new powerful political party, while the conspirators flee or try to maintain support in the eastern provinces of the Roman Empire. At the same time, the people of Rome, already shaken by previous civil wars, find themselves fearing a new wave of violence and instability. The growing tensions will quickly degenerate into armed struggles, foreshadowing new uprisings and fluctuating alliances between the various factions present. This gradual collapse of republican institutions coincides with another phenomenon. The Mediterranean has become the hub of commercial flows and strategic ambitions. Long before the contemporary era, this sea enclosed between three continents, Europe, Africa, and Asia, resembles an essential maritime highway. Commercial fleets carrying grains, oils, wines, and other more precious goods constantly cross this space. Ports develop, trading posts expand, and land routes connect the interior of coastal regions to major political centers like Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, or Carthage, rebuilt after its initial destruction in 146 before Christ. In this context, mastering sea navigation becomes a major asset for any leader seeking supremacy. Whoever controls the maritime routes largely controls commercial exchanges, but also the deployment of military troops from one shore to another. The years 40 to 30. Before Christ, thus see the Mediterranean basin oscillate between the dream of Roman peace, Pax Romana, and the nightmare of a civil war that could rekindle ancient hatreds. On one side, republican ideals and the glory inherited from earlier conquests, notably those of Pompey, then Caesar, linger in memories. On the other, the future takes shape with the emergence of new political figures with fierce ambition. Caesar's assassination thus acts as a catalyst. It is no longer just a question of the form of government in Rome, republic or disguised monarchy, but also the geopolitical balance of the entire Mediterranean, whose Roman hegemony continues to expand. The impact of this potential civil war is not limited to the Roman heartland alone. The provinces, client kingdoms, and distant possessions watched these troubles with concern, trying to anticipate the consequences a regime change in Rome might have on their interests and autonomy. Eastern cities, more sensitive to the presence of local potentates, are preparing, some to welcome or to fight armies mandated by Rome. Greek elites, local satraps, or kings allied with the Republic must now contend with growing instability. Thus, this shift of the Mediterranean basin, marked by the gradual disappearance of the values of the old Roman Republic and the rise of new forms of power, reverberates in the economy, society, and diplomacy of many coastal cities and kingdoms. By the end of the 1st century before Christ, the Roman Republic dominates the Mediterranean rim, but it is not alone. To the east, the Persian Empire, governed by the Arsacid dynasty, extends over present-day Iran and part of Mesopotamia, with Ctesiphon as its capital. Known for their horse archers, difficult to counter even for the Roman legions, the Parthians inherit the Achaemenid and Seleucid empires and vie with Rome for control of Mesopotamia and Armenia. Since the Battle of Carrhae in 53 before Christ, where Roman general Crassus died, Parthians and Romans have engaged in periodic clashes while maintaining fragile diplomatic relations. Further south, the Kingdom of Egypt, under the Ptolemaic dynasty, is ruled by Cleopatra VII in the late 40s before Christ. She embodies the Greek legacy of Alexander the Great and the pharaonic tradition. Alexandria, rich and cultural, is a crossroads between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, with trade routes to Nubia and sub-Saharan Africa. The Nile, a source of fertile lands, allows the country to support large armies and supply grain to vast regions. The Romans keep a watchful eye on Egypt for its agricultural production and strategic position, controlling Alexandria, equating to mastering a key to Mediterranean prosperity. Further south, the Kushite Empire in present-day Sudan has an ancient history with urban centers like Napata and Meroe. Kushite rulers maintain essential trade links for gold and ivory, raw materials circulated northwards via the Nile. A part of trans-African commerce, including incense and other exotic products, passes through these territories. Often little mentioned in Greco-Roman sources, Kush remains an important regional player. To the east, in the Indian subcontinent, the Kushan and Indo-Greek kingdoms, heirs of Alexander's conquest in the 4th century before Christ, form a commercial crossroads between Hellenistic civilizations, the Indian world, and China. The Silk Roads, still incomplete and exposed to disturbances, promote the circulation of precious goods and cultural influences. The Indo-Greeks illustrate marked syncretism. Their coins blend Greek and Indian motifs, and they adopt local elements while preserving language and Hellenic traditions. This blending reflects the global dynamics of the time, showing that globalization is already being built on long-distance political and commercial links. Even further east, the Han Empire, under Emperor Cheng, 33-7. Before Christ, consolidates its institutions. After the conquests and reforms of previous emperors, the Western Han China aims at Central Asia to secure the caravan routes essential for silk delivery to the West. These nascent exchanges include importing glassware, metal objects, and sometimes musical instruments from countries unknown to most Chinese. The major overland trade routes, combining caravan segments and fluvial stages, traverse fortified oases, welcoming lands for merchants connecting China, India, and Parthians. Although the Mediterranean is out of direct reach, the idea of trading with the West already fosters envy and curiosity in the imperial courts. On the American continent, Civilizations are thriving without contact with the Mediterranean world. The Olmec cities have disappeared several centuries ago, but their legacy survives in the Mesoamerican cultures of the first millennium before Christ. The Zapotecs, in what is now the state of Oaxaca in Mexico, develop dynamic city-states, while the Maya prepare for their classical civilization. These peoples build pyramids, develop calendars, and terrace agriculture, showing that humanity evolves simultaneously on different continents without direct interactions. While the known world of the Romans is centered on the Mediterranean, the globe sees the emergence of other centers of civilization that are advanced technologically or artistically. This period from 40 to 30 before Christ is part of an extensive network of exchanges. The Mediterranean remains the main axis of commercial flows between the west, Italy, the Roman province of Hispania, and the east, Greece, Asia Minor, the Levant, Egypt. But longer routes indirectly connect the Far East to Europe. Silk from China, incense and spices, pepper, cinnamon, ginger, from Arabia or the Indian subcontinent arouse keen interest in Rome and Hellenistic courts. Precious metals, gold, silver, sometimes tin, circulate in both directions, fueling a luxury trade reserved for elites. A notable development is the appearance or intensification of maritime routes in the Indian Ocean. For several centuries, merchants have been using the monsoon winds to travel between the East African coast, Arabia, India, and the islands of Southeast Asia. With Egypt's Ptolemaic dynasty turning towards the Red Sea, the first formal Indo-Mediterranean maritime routes are born, passing through Egyptian ports like Berenice or Myos Hormuz. From there, ships head to Arabia, Ethiopia, or India by following the coasts and benefiting from seasonal winds. This direct connection shortens the journey for spices and incense, limiting the use of costly and risky land routes, enriching certain ports, and diffusing cultural influences up to Yemen and the Horn of Africa. A factor complicates the balance of exchanges: climatic conditions, notably droughts in the Levant. Towards the end of the 1st century before Christ, an arid phase affects Syria and Palestine. This occasional aridity causes agricultural tensions, cereal shortages, price hikes, rural migrations to cities, local unrest. In societies already marked by conflicts, a deficit in wheat or olive oil can cause social destabilization. Rome, aware of this fragility, seeks to diversify its supplies, making the takeover of Ptolemaic Egypt, rich in grain, crucial. These flows of food or luxury goods shape geopolitics. A state controlling commercial crossroads increases its wealth, strengthens its army, and bears more weight against its rivals. At the end of the 1st century before Christ, commerce is a diplomatic and strategic weapon that can determine alliances or confrontations. From 40 to 30. Before Christ, an intense exchange of ideas, religious beliefs, and scientific knowledge takes place. From Mesopotamia, the cradle of Babylonian astronomy, knowledge about observing stars, eclipses, and calendars influences Greek scholars. The Babylonians transmit calculation methods and databases to Hellenistic researchers for a better understanding of the cosmos. In Alexandria, the library compiles, translates, and perfects this knowledge, linking Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and Greek knowledge. Greece, the cradle of philosophical currents, still shines in the Mediterranean. Stoicism, founded at the end of the 4th century before Christ by Zeno of Citium, influences Roman patricians and the intellectual elite. Stoics advocate moral excellence and peace of mind, recognizing a rational cosmic order guiding the universe, inspiring loyalty and a sense of duty, taken up by some Roman politicians fascinated by Greek rigor. Epicureanism, founded by Epicurus in the 4th century before Christ, proposes happiness based on the absence of pain and tranquility of mind, appealing to a cultivated part that seeks to reduce anxiety about death and turmoil by favoring simple and measured pleasures. In parallel, Oriental cults spread throughout the Mediterranean, responding to new spiritual quests. The mysteries of Isis, derived from the Egyptian religion, found great success in Greek cities and then among certain Romans. Isis embodies the protective mother, magician, and healer. Her cult, with initiation rites, processions, and offerings, fascinates those seeking an intimate communion with the divinity. The cult of Mithra, a god of Iranian origin associated with the sun and victory, also extends. Worshipped in underground or semi-buried Mithraea, Mithra attracts soldiers and merchants charmed by his esoteric rituals of trial and initiatory fraternity. These religious and philosophical currents testify to the mobility of people and ideas across the Mediterranean. Major port cities like Alexandria, Antioch, Rhodes, or Pergamum attract merchants, students, writers, and proselytizing priests. In these cosmopolitan areas, interactions between diverse populations create new syncretic practices, combining Isis festivals with Dionysian processions, integrating into Stoic thought Oriental concepts like the natural harmony of Persian sages. Access to knowledge is liberalized thanks to the Library of Alexandria and the philosophical academies of Athens. This decade is not only marked by political destabilization around Rome, it is also a time of great intellectual vitality. Scholars, theologians, mystics, and philosophers confront various scientific and religious traditions from the Levant, Egypt, or Persia, sharpening reason and critical thinking. The Mediterranean becomes a crossroads of ancient influences, where men, objects, and ideas circulate relentlessly by sea, land routes, and political solidarities. This effervescence lays the durable foundations of the Roman Empire and defines several centuries of cultural, religious, and scientific development in the ancient world. In the 1st century before Christ, Rome was the dominant power of the Mediterranean basin. The conquests of Julius Caesar in Gaul and certain Mediterranean regions had extended Roman influence. His political and military prestige was immense, and his institutional reforms had reshaped the Republic. This momentum and the accumulation of unprecedented power attracted the opposition of part of the senatorial elite, fearing a disguised monarchy. The conflict between Caesarians and Republicans culminated in the assassination of Caesar in 44 CE before Christi, creating a political vacuum. In this climate, several military leaders opposed each other, leading to the formation of the Second Triumvirate in 43 before Christ, bringing together Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus. The following years were marked by fragile alliances, growing rivalries, and brutal reforms to consolidate power, thus preparing the groundwork for an imperial regime. On March 15th, 44. Before Christ, the Ides of March, Julius Caesar entered the Senate unaware that a plot had been prepared by a faction of senators opposed to his perceived rapid ascension. The main conspirators were Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, accompanied by other senators worried about Caesar becoming perpetual dictator and threatening the republican institutions. The assassination was brutal. Caesar was stabbed multiple times, falling at the feet of the statue of Pompey, his former rival. Some accounts, like Shakespeare's, mention et tu, Brute, addressed to Brutus, but ancient testimonies differ on his last words. The act aimed to overthrow a man considered too powerful. Caesar's death did not stabilize Rome. The capital and its territories were shaken by significant political uncertainty. The population, often beneficiaries of Caesar's generosity through distributions of grain and games, reacted with indignation. His supporters, the Caesarians, rallied around close figures, while the assassins justified their act by presenting Caesar as a threat to liberty. The power vacuum was accentuated by the absence of a clear rule of succession. Caesar had written a will naming his grandnephew, Caius Octavius, the future Augustus, as the principal heir. Barely 19 years old and still little known in Rome, he joined Italy from Epirus to take over. Meanwhile, Mark Antony, a loyal lieutenant of Caesar and consul in 44 before Christi, tried to assert himself as the legitimate successor to his authority. The crisis took a dramatic turn with fires in Rome ignited by popular anger. Caesar's funeral pyre symbolized the fracture. Some demanded vengeance against the conspirators, while others supported the senators. Ill-prepared, the plotters found themselves isolated. Mark Antony gained influence, but the arrival of Octavian changed the situation. The rivalry between Antony, experienced and popular, and Octavian, young heir invested with a sacred mission, sowed the seeds of future tensions. In the face of growing instability, certain authority figures sought to restore order. The Roman Senate, fearing civil war, attempted to maneuver Mark Antony and Octavian as two counterweights, but the animosity between the Senate and Mark Antony strengthened after the latter confiscated substantial state funds and pursued an aggressive policy. The major turning point came in 43, before Christ, with the official formation of a triumvirate in Bologna, bringing together Octavian, Mark Antony, and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, former master of cavalry and friend of Caesar. This second triumvirate was sanctioned by a law passed by the people, giving it a legal status different from the first triumvirate of Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar, which had never been formalized. The stated aim was to restore republican order, but these three men primarily sought to consolidate their positions and eliminate opposition. They divided the provinces. Mark Antony received Cisalpine Gaul and Transalpine Gaul. Octavian obtained Africa, Sicily, and Sardinia, while Lepidus, often the most subdued, took Hispania and retained some authority over Roman Africa. These allocations fluctuated according to wars, alliances, and negotiations. The second triumvirate quickly became the supreme power in Rome. The triumvirs implemented a severe repression to finance their armies and prevent any resistance. This is the period of the proscriptions. The lists of the proscribed included those considered enemies of the state, in reality enemies of the triumvirs who could be executed and dispossessed. Among the famous victims, Cicero, orator and defender of the Republic, was assassinated at 63. After having denounced Mark Antony in the Philippics. To raise troops and pay the soldiers, the triumvirs confiscated property, imposed ransoms, and enriched themselves personally. These resources financed the wars against Caesar's assassins, notably at Philippi in 42 before Christ, and against any competitor. In the administration, local governments swore allegiance to the triumvirs. Garrisons were installed, where power risked being challenged. This control, inspired by Caesar, maintained the cohesion of the empire, but the violent methods created tensions in the senatorial class and among the triumvirs themselves, who had to manage a vast territory while conquering new resources for their ambitions. Behind the apparent unity of the second triumvirate, the ambitions of the three men differed. After eliminating their common enemies, they disputed the leadership of the Republic. Two characters dominated, Octavian and Mark Antony. Lepidus, despite his role in the formation of the triumvirate, struggled to assert himself against the determination and popularity of his colleagues. Octavian, young heir of Caesar, quickly showed himself to be cautious, skillful, and determined. He cultivated his public image as the adoptive son of a Republican hero, embodying legitimate continuity. His propagandist talent appeared soon after Caesar's assassination. He minted coins with his likeness and the inscription Caesar Divi Filius, reminding of his adoptive lineage. He surrounded himself with loyal advisors like Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. Realistically, he reinforced his authority in his provinces while ensuring popular support in Rome, showing military prudence by targeting weak adversaries and consolidating his positions. Mark Antony, an experienced military leader and charismatic speaker, inherited his brilliant campaigns with Caesar. Impulsive and sometimes prone to pleasures, he remained courageous and capable of galvanizing his troops, promising spoils and lands for their loyalty. His funeral speech after Caesar's assassination proved his influence over the crowd. His relationship with Octavian was initially based on mutual interest in consolidating Caesar's power and eliminating the conspirators. But the differences between them emerged as soon as the threat from the assassins receded. Lepidus, important in the formation of the triumvirate, had a military and financial network, but struggled to maintain his influence. He did not obtain strategic provinces, limiting his decisions. Less charismatic than Antony, and less of a tactician than Octavian, he played a fragile role as an arbiter between them. His authority in Hispania and Africa, although notable, did not rival Antony's resources in the east, or Octavian's influence in Italy. After annihilating the last supporters of the conspirators, relations between Antony and Octavian deteriorated. The issue was the recognition of the economic and military resources of the provinces. Antony, in Gaul, noted that Octavian was strengthening his hold on Rome and cultivating the support of the Senate, which was being mishandled. Octavian criticized Antony's excessive military expenditures. Each claimed the legacy of Caesar. Antony reminded that he had been his right-hand man. Octavian invoked his adoptive filiation as the only true heir. The major conflict centered on the Italian lands. Octavian wanted to settle veterans there, especially in Campania, to ensure their support. Antony demanded a share of the lands, but Octavian refused, arguing that these soldiers owed him loyalty. Antony accused Octavian of breaking the collegiality of the triumvirate. The tensions frequently called back legions to strategic regions, leaving officers uncertain about which side to choose in the case of escalation. Meanwhile, Antony's political base shifted towards the east, where the wheat harvest, coastal prosperity, and the inheritance of Hellenistic kingdoms offered significant resources for raising troops. Octavian, on the other hand, focused his communication on defending traditional values, peace, and land distributions to veterans, embodying for part of Italy the image of the young leader concerned with the unity of Rome. Antony sought to forge a new identity in the East, that of a strong man, seductive and ambitious to extend the borders against the Parthian Empire. These divergent projects fueled the competition. Lepidus remained in the shadows, avoiding a rupture that would distance him from power. The first internal cracks in the triumvirate also manifested in the Senate. Some senators, tired of the conflicts, wanted to maintain the alliance to avoid another civil war. Others preferred to support one triumvir to overthrow the other two, hoping to restore a traditional republic by exploiting rivalries. None of these attempts imposed themselves permanently. The triumvirs remained bound by the necessity of quelling resistances and extracting indispensable resources for their troops. Octavian set up a nascent propaganda machine, with speeches, coins, ceremonies, and rumors. Each gesture reminded of his rank as son of the divine Caesar, touching a population still marked by Julius Caesar. He also exploited the senatorial quarrels, insinuating that Antony, more liberal, was not entirely faithful to Roman values. This tone intensified as they vied to present themselves as the best defenders of tradition and Caesar's memory. Simultaneously, Antony multiplied military operations in Gaul and tried to establish himself in northern Italy, but sometimes encountered resistance from cities loyal to Octavian. Institutional quarrels and the redistribution of public offices revived tensions. Some of Antony's magistrates were contested by Octavian's supporters. To ease tensions, the triumvirs met several times and concluded provisional territorial compromises without resolving the deep-seated differences. In the midst of these maneuvers, Lepidus, less sharp and ambitious, played a secondary role. He strengthened himself in his provinces, amassing the riches of Africa, which was not negligible. But his lack of strategy and ideological grip relegated him to a role of a bystander during major turning points. Octavian and Antony were shaping a new dynamic where the republic, apparently maintained by the triumvirate, was reduced to a battleground of rivalry between two determined leaders. At the end of 43, before Christ, and the beginning of 42. Before Christ, the Second Triumvirate legally dominated the Roman political scene, but discord was growing. The persecution of senatorial opposition, the constant need to raise funds and troops, the strong personalities of the triumvirs, and the attachment to Caesar's legacy created an explosive cocktail. Despite the appearance of agreement, the collegiate entity created to save the Republic was fragile. The following months would see major battles against Caesar's assassins and territorial readjustments. The wounded Republic was moving towards a disguised monarchical regime, whose rise of Octavian would be the most significant symbol and culmination. In the years following the death of Julius Caesar, two figures dominate the Roman Empire, Mark Antony in the east and Octavian in the west. Antony forms ties with Ptolemaic Egypt governed by Cleopatra, while Octavian consolidates his power in Italy, Gaul, and the Roman West. Their paths reflect two different visions of power and alliances. From 41 to 34. Before Christ, the alliance of Antony and Cleopatra upsets the east, while Octavian strengthens his control over the west, a key period in Roman history. In 41 before Christ, Mark Antony, in charge of the administration of the eastern provinces, must maintain order, raise troops, collect taxes, and prepare military campaigns, notably against the Parthian Empire. Governing the East involves managing allied kingdoms, trade flows, and powerful states like Ptolemaic Egypt. It is in Tarsus, in Asia Minor, that Antony and Cleopatra meet. Cleopatra VII, the last of the Ptolemies, reigns over a wealthy kingdom controlling the Nile Valley, wheat reserves, and a trade crossroads between the Eastern Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and Asia. Alexandria, her capital, is a cultural and scientific center. Coming to Tarsus to consolidate her alliance with Rome, she seeks the support of Antony, who has become master of the East, essential to preserve her throne threatened by internal intrigues and Roman ambitions. After having a son with Caesarion, she must renegotiate her alliances after his assassination. The first contact in Tarsus, in the middle of the year 41 before Christ, is often described as a theatrical episode. To impress Antony, Cleopatra arrives on a sumptuous ship, decorated with gold and purple, evoking Aphrodite or Isis, the protective goddess of power in Egypt. This appearance immediately charmed Mark Antony, whose military reputation is accompanied by a taste for Greek culture, luxury, and festivities. Their relationship is not only romantic, but political. Antony finds financial resources in Cleopatra, while she ensures the protection of the most influential Roman leader in the East. This political sentimental alliance is not accepted in Rome. Many Romans fear the influence of Eastern rulers and the opulence of Alexandria. From 37. Before Christ onwards, Antony resides more often in Alexandria, surrounds himself with advisors, and adopts Oriental cultural practices. Lavish banquets mingle with diplomatic concerns. He plans expeditions against the Parthians and maintains his authority over the kingdoms of Asia Minor and Syria. Cleopatra's influence plays a major role. She provides her immense fortune and supports the conquests. She knows that this support requires solid agreements, the Ptolemaic history reminding of the necessity to ally with Rome to survive. In 34 before Christ, their relationship reaches a peak with the donations of Alexandria, donations of territories to their children. Antony recognizes Caesarion, son of Caesar and Cleopatra, as king of Egypt and Cyprus, and allocates kingdoms to his own children with Cleopatra, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus. During a ceremony in Alexandria, Antony proclaims Cleopatra Queen of Kings, while Caesarion is presented as the legitimate heir of Julius Caesar, challenging Octavian's position. For the Senate, it is an affront, a Roman distributing lands under Roman influence to foreign heirs. This gesture immortalizes the alliance, but provokes deep indignation, soon legitimizing open war. In Rome and the West, Octavian gradually emerges as the central figure of power. Born of a modest branch of the gens Julia, he is the adopted son of Julius Caesar, according to the dictator's will, a status that grants him immense prestige. The entire West is his field of action. From Italy to the edges of Hispania, Octavian dedicates himself to the pacification and reorganization of territories, essential for strengthening his power. He first needs to quell various revolts and resist the followers of Sextus Pompey, the defender of the Republican cause. Several naval and land campaigns enable Octavian and his general Agrippa to defeat Sextus Pompey around 36 before Christ. The success secures control of maritime routes, vital for Italy. Simultaneously, Octavian stabilizes Gaul, recently conquered by Caesar. The Celtic peoples need to be subjected to a solid administration and a network of military colonies. To grant lands to veterans and ensure their loyalty, he founds or develops colonies in several Gallo-Roman cities where Roman law and Latin culture spread. These veteran colonies are crucial. They relieve Italy of a surplus of demobilized veterans, often a source of social tension, and serve as military and cultural anchor points in unstable regions. We thus see the flourishing of retired soldier settlements, creating genuine Roman enclaves in barely Romanized territories. The settlers benefit from fertile lands while remaining indebted to Octavian, thereby consolidating his support base in the army and among the population of the western provinces. Aware of the power of symbols, Octavian presents himself as the spiritual heir of Caesar. He promotes the cult of the divine Caesar, that is, the deification of Julius Caesar assassinated in 44 before Christ. Roman political games are ill-suited to the divinity of a living citizen, but Octavian circumvents this sensitivity by erecting a temple dedicated to deified Caesar, asserting his filial piety and posing as son of a god. This strategy allows him to cement his moral authority, for if he is seen as the living extension of the dynasty, his official title, initially Caius Iulius Caesar Octavianus, increasingly links him to the idea that he is the undisputed leader of Rome. On the domestic scene, Octavian manifests harshness and clemency at the right moment. He grants Roman citizenship to loyal communities, distributes tax advantages, organizes sumptuous games, and shows magnanimity towards certain allies. The local elites in the West feel integrated into the Roman sphere. This integration program relies on funding sourced from taxes, the spoils of military campaigns, or fines imposed on rebellious cities. The West is gradually pacified and redirected towards a single political center, Octavian. Between 41 and 34. Before Christ, the unification of the West and the pacification of Gaul offer Octavian growing economic and human resources. Strengthened by his image as an exemplary Roman and a pious son of the divine Caesar, he prepares for confrontation with Antony, increasingly decried in Rome for his alleged subjugation to the charms of the East and the Egyptian queen. While the alliance of Antony and Cleopatra provokes admiration in the East, it stirs the growing hostility of Roman institutions, which the young Octavian maneuvers to his advantage. He must then deploy an arsenal of propaganda to turn Roman public opinion against this couple deemed disloyal. At this stage, a crucial issue shapes the destiny of Antony and Cleopatra, the war of images and discourses in Rome. Propaganda already existed in antiquity, where words, symbols, and rumors could heavily influence the fate of a politician. Octavian, aided by advisors, intellectuals, and artists, orchestrates a campaign to blacken the image of the Anatolian-Egyptian couple. Fiery speeches, pamphlets, and rumors about the decadent morals of the East spread throughout the Italian peninsula. It is claimed that Antony is no longer a true Roman, but the puppet of Cleopatra, the corrupting Oriental queen. For the Roman public, fond of exoticism, Cleopatra appears as a dangerous enchantress. Authors close to Octavian emphasize her lust, her deceitfulness, her mastery of poisons, and esoteric rituals inspired by Egyptian mythologies. The propaganda applies the stereotype of Greek wisdom corrupted by Oriental excess, creating a sharp divide between the sobriety of Roman institutions, respectful of the law, and the festive excesses of Alexandria, a land of voluptuousness, excess, and foreign gods. In his speeches, Octavian highlights the preservation of traditional Roman values and virtue against the risk of an Eastern transformation of Rome. The realm of morality and religion becomes a point of crystallization. How to tolerate a Roman leader who proclaims himself almost pharaoh. How to bear children from a union with an Egyptian queen receiving vast portions of Roman territories and being raised in habits contrary to Latin customs. Through law and the defense of pudicitia, virtue, modesty, Octavian embodies moral rectitude against the extravagance of Antony and Cleopatra. This propaganda also exploits the idea of the luxury of Alexandria. According to orators close to Octavian, the danger goes beyond Antony's loyalty to Rome. The threat is the corruption of minds and hearts. The East is associated with voluptuousness, secret rites, splendor, and opulence. Roman leaders, attached to discipline and traditions, rail against the transgression represented by this couple. The fascination for Cleopatra, capable of subjugating a Roman proconsul, is turned against her. She is accused of being a siren who diverts Antony from his duties. The legal nature of the attack is crucial. Octavian does not just want to tarnish the image of his adversaries. He wishes to justify a legal war against Cleopatra. While some hesitate at a new civil conflict, he asserts that his target is not Mark Antony, but the Egyptian queen who supposedly bewitched him. He thus shifts the debate from internal discord to a war against an external enemy, legitimate in the eyes of the Senate and the Roman people, who fear an invasion or submission to Egypt. The accusations focus on Antony's neglect of legal obligations, misappropriation of legions, taxes, scorn for the Senate in favor of a foreign sovereign. The donations of Alexandria reinforce these accusations, with Antony recognizing the sovereignty of Caesarion and his children over traditionally Roman territories. Many historians consider that this smear campaign strongly influenced public opinion. The fear of seeing Rome lose its identity and power under an Eastern queen was ingrained. The tales of poisoned feasts, exotic musicians, dances, and enthralling perfumes were part of a strategy to present Antony as a traitor, more Egyptian than Roman. For a Greek or Eastern audience, these descriptions seemed exaggerated. But in Rome, where fear of foreign influences existed since the end of the Punic Wars, they found considerable resonance. Octavian channels these anxieties to present himself as the guarantor of the Republic's dignitas. Simultaneously, his propaganda exalts his sense of duty, his attachment to tradition, his status as heir of divine Caesar, and his respect for Roman cults. Coins bearing his image extol his civic virtues and his lineage with Caesar. The money, exchanged throughout the empire, carries a clear political message. While Antony is suspected of wanting to move power to Alexandria, Octavian defends the heart of Romanity. Each denarius becomes a tool of communication, each temple constructed or restored a sign of allegiance to the gods. In this battle of images, legal rhetoric is central. Opponents of Antony emphasize Roman law. The ideal Roman must serve the Senate and the people through magistracies. By contracting exotic unions and claiming royal titles, Antony would be renouncing his dignity as a Roman citizen, a leitmotif exploited by Octavian. While some Eastern populations viewed favorably this fusion of Greek, Egyptian, and Roman traditions, the Roman high society perceived it as a political sacrilege. No matter that the riches came from Egypt, for the propaganda, they were a temptation pushing Antony to treason. The cultural and political climate at the end of the 1st century, before Christ, was perfectly suited to Octavian's enterprise. The memory of civil wars, the nostalgia for an idealized republic, and the fear of new violence made the idea of an external enemy plausible. Octavian positioned himself as the protector of peace, moral order, and Roman identity threatened by Antony's Eastern ties. Roman law, referring to the republican values of discipline and fairness, legitimized Octavian to accuse Antony of breaking the sacred pact between magistrate and people, preferring a foreign monarch. Ultimately, the propaganda machine of Octavian and his entourage proved to be very effective. Politically, it rallied the majority of the Senate worried about a power coming from the East. Religiously, it invoked piety towards the divine Caesar and the Roman tradition, portraying Antony and Cleopatra as ambitious and luxurious, incompatible with Latin rigor. Culturally, it exploited stereotypes and latent xenophobia towards the East, accusing of debauchery and conspiracy against the Republic. Between Antony's return to the East after his division with Octavian and the donations of Alexandria in 34 before Christ, the elements of the final conflict were put in place. While Antony and Cleopatra united their destinies, Octavian imposed himself as the sole protector of Roman values, with powerful propaganda that seduced the people and the senatorial elites. This war of images prepared the decisive confrontation on the Mediterranean shores. The subsequent events, the tragedy of the couple and the rise of Octavian, were born from this climate of suspicion. Between 41 and 34. Before Christ, the whole Roman Mediterranean witnessed this ideological duel between Antony and Cleopatra and Octavian with Rome, its legions, its temples, and its laws. The cultural clash, often instrumentalized, became Octavian's most formidable weapon to rally Rome. There was only one step left for war to erupt, and for the East to confront the West, sealing the Mediterranean fate. In the middle of the 1st century before Christ, Mark Antony, Roman general and member of the Second Triumvirate, sought to consolidate Rome's prestige in the East. The Parthian Empire, led by the Arsacid dynasty, was then one of the few rivals capable of competing with Rome. Its political center was at Ctesiphon near the Tigris, modern-day Iraq, and its territories stretched from Syria to the eastern plains of Iran. The Parthians had already dealt reverses to Rome, notably at Carrhae in 53 before Christ. Antony wished to avenge this affront, extend his influence, and prove he was the legitimate heir of Julius Caesar in the East. In 36 before Christ, he launched a military campaign against the Parthians. He negotiated a safe passage through Armenia, a strategic region north of Mesopotamia, and obtained an agreement with King Artavasdes II for logistical and military support. His army included seasoned Roman legions and auxiliaries from various territories. Coordination was essential, as troops, pack animals, and siege engines advanced through hostile and mountainous areas, sometimes without developed roads. Logistics were a challenge. The convoys loaded with food, weapons, and material moved slowly. The Parthians practiced a war of harassment with their cavalry and formidable bows, carrying out lightning attacks then withdrawing. Antony relied on the power of his legions to force a pitched battle, favoring infantry, but the enemy avoided direct combat, betting on a war of attrition to cut off supplies. Difficulties mounted. The hot and dry season made crossing difficult, with little water for soldiers and animals. Food reserves were lost during ambushes or through miscalculations of stages. Artavasdes II's hesitation, suspected of playing a double game, complicated coordination. Antony faced an atmosphere of distrust affecting the discipline of his troops. Facing these difficulties, Antony relied on the financial and material support of Cleopatra VII, the last sovereign of the Ptolemies, who ruled a wealthy Egypt with a recognized fleet. She provided funds, ships, and material, played a role in strategic decisions, and ensured the delivery of reinforcements. In return, Antony sought to strengthen his legitimacy in the East and consolidate the diplomatic link between Rome and Egypt, embodied by their political and personal relationship. The integration of Egyptian resources is not enough to avoid setbacks. Despite some initial successes against the Parthians, Antony suffers heavy losses. Exhausted and harassed by enemy cavalry, the soldiers have to retreat. The human losses number in the thousands, and morale is greatly affected. The 36th campaign is considered a failure that tarnishes his reputation with the Senate and the Romans. He returns to Syria with less glory, aware that this failure fuels Octavian's criticisms. These difficulties aggravate the internal tensions in the Second Triumvirate. The more Antony fails in the east, the more Octavian strengthens his position in the west. The support of Cleopatra, supposed to be an asset, fuels criticism in Rome, where the alliance with a foreign queen is frowned upon. Antony's prestige suffers, but his failure does not make him give up on dominating the east. On the contrary, he strengthens his ties with Egypt, preparing for a decisive confrontation with Octavian in the years to come. As Mark Antony tries to rebuild his image after his costly Parthian campaign, the political situation in Rome deteriorates. Since the formation of the Second Triumvirate in 43 before Christ, Antony has controlled the east, Octavian the west, while Lepidus sees his role diminish. This concentration of power is unstable, with personal ambitions threatening the fragile balance after Caesar's assassination. Antony's return has not regained the expected luster, and trust among the triumvirs is almost non-existent. Octavian garners success in the west. He strengthens his control of Italy, founds colonies for his veterans, and ensures the loyalty of vital regions like Gaul. On the propaganda front, he presents himself as the guardian of Roman traditions and the adoptive son caring for Caesar's memory, highlighting Antony's eastern drift, accused of sacrificing the Republic for Cleopatra. Weakened by his military failure, Antony relies on Egyptian support to finance his forces. The turning point occurs in 32 before Christ, when Octavian obtains Antony's secret will kept by the Vestals. This document would reveal Antony's intentions to grant his children with Cleopatra Roman territories in Phoenicia, Coele-Syria, and Cilicia. According to Octavian's propaganda, Antony would have requested to be buried in Alexandria, betraying his eastern roots and his estrangement from Rome. Octavian uses this revelation to rally the Senate against Antony, presenting the affair as a threat to the Republic, arguing that Antony has allowed himself to be corrupted by the Ptolemaic court. The maneuver paves the way for war, with Octavian having a declaration voted against Cleopatra and not against Antony, thus respecting Roman laws that prohibit one senator from fighting another. The Senate, largely won over to Octavian, approves the measure. The message is clear. The Republic faces an external peril embodied by Cleopatra and her influence over Antony. Despite criticisms highlighting that the rivalry is personal, the official version asserts that Rome must preserve its integrity against a foreign queen, claiming to subjugate the city. The break is complete, and Italy prepares for a major conflict against the forces of Antony and Cleopatra, pushing the empire towards a large-scale naval and land confrontation. Between 33 and 32 before Christ, the Roman Empire divides into two blocks: the east under Antony and Cleopatra, and the west, dominated by Octavian and Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. Both camps launch into an arms race and mobilization. Octavian, influential over the Senate and Italy, organizes vast recruitments. The legions of Italy are strengthened, and western provinces like Gaul and the Iberian Peninsula provide soldiers and resources. The tax pressure increases, justified by the Egyptian threat. Octavian's strategy relies on his navy. Agrippa improves the arsenal of Misenum, creating lighter and faster ships. Octavian bets on Liburnians, small maneuverable galleys, and ships equipped with the harpax, an improved grappling hook to immobilize the enemy. Every detail matters. Choice of wood, rowers, crew training. Agrippa trains officers capable of coordinating the fleet. Antony and Cleopatra favor heavier ships. Triremes, quadriremes, and leporiares, very large vessels, carry numerous soldiers. Their power compensates for the lack of maneuverability. A massive ram and a wide deck allow them to board and overwhelm the opponent. The financing of the Eastern Armada comes from the wealth of Ptolemaic Egypt. The gold and resources of the Nile recruit mercenaries and maintain the lifestyle of the officers. Cleopatra also mobilizes her Egyptian fleet, adapted to the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. Egyptian ports, notably Alexandria, accelerate the construction, repair, and arming of ships. On land, Octavian defends the Italian coasts and prepares bases in Greece for the offensive. The control of cities and supply points is crucial, and garrisons multiply. Roads maintained by military engineers facilitate movements toward Illyria and Macedonia. Antony secures his positions in Asia Minor, obtains the allegiance of client kings like those of Judea and Commagene, and sets up food and arms depots on the eastern coast of the Ionian Sea. The ideological argument holds a vital place in this imminent confrontation. Octavian strives to convince Italy and the Roman world that he is defending the purity of republican institutions against Oriental tyranny. The official discourse denounces the harmful influence of Cleopatra on Antony and suggests that Antony has renounced his Roman identity to behave like a Hellenistic king. Many senators in Rome adopt this version out of interest or conviction. From Alexandria, Antony presents himself as the heir to Caesar's dream in the East, a unifier of the empire against Octavian's solitary ambition, highlighting the economic prosperity ensured by trade routes from Asia to the Mediterranean and the cultural power of the Alexandrian court, where Greeks, Romans, and Egyptians intersect. As the deadline approaches, each side evaluates its strengths. Rumors of a decisive naval confrontation in the Ionian Sea spread. Antony's generals know that their large ships, though powerful in boarding actions, could be vulnerable to Agrippa's harassment tactics. However, they hope that numerical superiority, the determination of the crews, and the formidable onboard artillery will threaten Octavian's lighter galleys. At the end of 32, before Christ, the two adversaries observe each other, multiply diplomatic skirmishes, and prepare for the following operations. Other Mediterranean powers remain attentive to the outcome. Some allies of Antony doubt and consider rallying to Octavian if the situation turns bad. In Italy, the increase in taxes and massive requisitions cause discontent and fatigue among the popular classes. Yet, the war machine is launched. Neither Antony nor Octavian wants to retreat, aware that their rivalry can only be resolved by the political or military elimination of the other. The preparations, propaganda, and betrayals confirm that the Roman Empire is heading towards a confrontation that will decide its destiny. Soon, all eyes will turn to the Adriatic and the Ionian Sea, where the political future of Rome will be played out. In the summer of 32, before Christ, the climate in the Mediterranean world is tense. Political alliances, once fragile, crack. In Rome, the rivalry between Octavian, designated heir of Julius Caesar, and Mark Antony, a powerful military leader in the East, reaches its peak. On the other side, Queen Cleopatra VII, sovereign of Egypt, defends her kingdom's independence while consolidating her influence with Antony. Aware of the stakes, they mobilize significant naval and land forces. On the maritime front, military preparation intensifies in 32. Before Christ, the arsenals are active. Coastal cities become food and ammunition depots. Both sides renovate and expand their fleets, as control of sea lanes is crucial. It is by ship that reinforcements, supplies, and mercenaries transit. This key moment precedes the decisive confrontation between these two blocks. Octavian, Julius Caesar's adopted son and future Augustus, methodically prepares to fight Mark Antony. He bases his hopes on naval mastery by relying on Admiral Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, a loyal and competent strategist. Agrippa plays a decisive role in the formation and modernization of the Western fleet based in Misenum, a port arsenal on the western coast of Italy near the Gulf of Naples. The Bay of Naples has long been a strategic location thanks to its deep, protected waters. Under the impetus of Agrippa, Misenum became one of the largest Roman naval complexes, designed to host and maintain several dozen warships. Warehouses for wood, ropes, and sails were constructed to support the projection into the western Mediterranean. Galleys, triremes, and Liburnians were quickly assembled or repaired. Agrippa established a system of dikes and basins to test the ships before deployment. Engineers multiplied innovations. The forges produced bronze rams to arm the bow, while workshops manufactured iron grapples, formidable tools for boarding enemy ships. The handling was assured by hundreds of slaves and workers requisitioned for war. The approach of Octavian and Agrippa emphasized the fleet's speed and maneuverability. The Romans, learning from past conflicts, avoided getting bogged down in battles where the power of catapults or the size of the ships would decide the outcome. Liburnians, small, light ships from the Dalmatian coast, were appreciated for their ease of maneuver. With a reduced crew, a single sail, and flexible ranks of rowers, they could quickly sail, encircle the enemy, or dodge their heavy rams. The tactic of boarding remained central. Agrippa refined a device akin to the corvus, articulated bridges and grapples thrown from the bow that clung to the enemy's hull to allow soldiers to board. He also innovated with better balanced rams and harpoons, called harpax, capable of hauling in an enemy ship. This tactic proved its effectiveness in previous conflicts, reinforcing Octavian's confidence in Agrippa. Octavian did not neglect the land troops. Other legates prepared the logistics to support the fleet. Legions near strategic ports were ready to embark or intervene on the Adriatic coast. Provision depots were established in the heel of the Italian boot, and camping grounds were planned for prolonged stays. Octavian, with Agrippa, thus ensured total mobility to respond quickly to any enemy movement. The Octavian-Agrippa duo relied on their strategic complicity and pragmatism. Octavian managed propaganda and senatorial mobilization, while Agrippa designed the fleet and orchestrated naval operations. By the summer of 32, their effectiveness was recognized in Italy, preparing troop morale and announcing an inevitable showdown with Antony's forces. On the opposing side, Mark Antony and Cleopatra united their resources to form an ambitious coalition. Antony, governor of several eastern provinces, had Roman soldiers and the support of client kingdoms. Cleopatra brought the naval tradition of Alexandria, her Egyptian ports, and above all, the Ptolemaic treasury, essential to the war effort. Antony and Cleopatra's fleet comprised about 230 ships, mostly heavy, from the coasts of Alexandria to the ports of Phoenicia and Cilicia. The Hellenistic East maintained a naval tradition inherited from the ancient Greek kingdoms with quadriremes, quinqueremes, and heptares. These ships had massive hulls with several ranks of rowers. Their imposing size and tonnage complicated maneuvers, especially in choppy seas or unfavorable winds, but their bows equipped with massive rams remained formidable for smashing into adversaries. The officers relied on brute force to break enemy lines. Maritime power also depended on manpower. Ptolemaic Egypt provided major support. Since Ptolemy I, the kingdom had developed an administration capable of raising and paying troops. Under Cleopatra VII, this financial mechanism recruited mercenary rowers of various origins, unemployed Greeks, Phoenician sailors, Syrian adventurers, Libyan mercenaries, attracted by the high pay. The treasury, fueled by the agricultural wealth of the Nile and Red Sea trade, covered the costs of several hundred galleys. This guaranteed Antony a mass of experienced crews, organized into disciplined teams, with a marine infantry ready for action. The mixed command brought together Roman officers and Eastern advisors to lead this diversity. Contrary to the stereotypes of Octavian propaganda, Cleopatra is not just Antony's companion. She actively organizes the maritime campaign. The ports of Alexandria and Pelusium serve as bases for the maintenance and construction of ships. Engineers in her service repair hulls and manufacture catapults. Egyptian craftsmen make sails, ropes, and propulsion systems adapted to heavy ships. Concerned with strengthening her reputation and protecting Egypt, Cleopatra oversees the military preparations. Her involvement reassures the Egyptians about the future of their kingdom, as Antony and Cleopatra's victory against Octavian would preserve Egyptian autonomy in a transforming Roman Empire. The Eastern Fleet gathers, aware of the strong opposition. In the summer of 32, before Christ, beyond the naval preparations, fortresses and land camps are built or reused. In this conflict, where the Mediterranean is a major maritime route, securing coasts and landing points is strategic. In Epirus, a region on the western coast of Greece, each camp controls the anchoring points and inland routes, leading to fertile lands and urban centers, providing wheat, water, and fodder. The shores of Epirus have several bays and natural ports used since antiquity for trade. During the Civil War, they become beachheads or logistical threats. Both factions reinforce or build fortifications to block passages and protect their fleets. These fortresses, often on heights, exploit natural defensive positions. Palisades, ditches, and stone enclosures are installed. Small contingents are posted there to alert of enemy movements and repel land incursions. The commanders of Octavian and Antony know that a blockade depends as much on controlling these points as on a naval breakthrough. From the early weeks of summer, wheat and barley harvests are gathered in temporary silos, usually pits sealed with clay to keep the grains dry. Fodder for pack animals and cavalry is stored under rudimentary but ventilated shelters to prevent mold. Even large fleets cannot survive long without a network of land deposits. Each camp fears famine more than battle. Roman military history shows that supply determines the outcome of a campaign. The requisitioned rural areas are under enormous pressure. Farmers give up a significant portion of their crops, sometimes compensated, sometimes plundered, depending on the treatment by the local army. For soldiers, potable water is also crucial. The coastal regions of Epirus, mainly mountainous, contain marshes and wetlands prone to disease. The environment around the Ambracian Gulf, formerly called the Gulf of Ambracia, is perilous for troops. The marshes promote the proliferation of mosquitoes, hotbeds of marsh fevers with symptoms similar to malaria, high fevers, chills, extreme fatigue, inability to fight. At that time, Greek and Roman doctors only had limited plant-based treatments without understanding the microbial or parasitic origin. The garrisons in these areas often lack hygiene. Stagnant water quickly becomes polluted, latrines are near water points, and defensive ditches fill with water, encouraging insects. A unit poorly protected or exhausted by drainage work can quickly fall ill and lose its combat capacity. Officers try to set up their camps on elevated terrains or drain the areas. However, the urgency and necessity of being near a port or strategic fortress sometimes compel commanders to settle in unhealthy places. Octavian and Antony receive reports on the spread of malaria and other fevers among their forces. A silent struggle ensues against time and climate, as much enemies as weapons. Each leader knows he cannot leave his troops exposed to disease for too long. Hence the importance, before confrontation, of accelerating decisions at sea or organizing a temporary retreat, depending on the situation and the evolution of negotiations or propaganda in Rome. As autumn approaches, the balance between the two blocks remains uncertain. Octavian and Agrippa have a light fleet and solid positions in Italy with supply depots, while Antony and Cleopatra have a larger and more imposing fleet capable of forcing a passage if the naval battle is favorable to them. The land arrangements show that neither side will easily accept surrender. The commanders, notably Agrippa and Antony's officers, must manage the geography of Epirus and critical sanitary conditions. They rely on scouts and agents to monitor enemy movements. Octavian and Antony, from a distance, receive regular reports and prepare to concentrate their forces at the signal of battle. Inaction becomes dangerous as the weariness of the soldiers and depletion of reserves increase. Each side watches for an opportunity: bluff, maritime ruse, or surprise land attack. Small fortifications ensure constant vigilance and quickly transmit information through signal fires or couriers. In the summer of 32, before Christ, forces split into two major blocks. In the west, Octavian and Agrippa bet on an agile and innovative fleet based at Misenum, with motivated troops and a political advantage related to defending Julius Caesar's legacy in Italy. In the east, Antony and Cleopatra rely on a vast territory from Egypt to Asia Minor, significant financial power, and a fleet of 230 ships, mostly heavier and more robust than those of the west. Maneuvering in the Ionian Sea is difficult due to the tonnage and diseases affecting the troops in Epirus. This confrontation will be much more than a naval clash. It is a crucial political and military shift for Roman history. Under the threat of civil war, each side knows the outcome will decide the supreme power in the Mediterranean. In the summer of 32, as armies prepare for battle amid fever and uncertainty, Octavian and Antony remain face-to-face, engaged in a mental and material showdown that will determine the future of Rome and the East. At the turn of the year 3030 Taf, before Christ, Tensions between Octavian, the future Augustus, and Mark Antony, supported by Cleopatra Sevanveth, crystallize around the Ionian Sea, northwest of Greece. This strategic zone controls access to Italy and becomes a decisive maneuvering field. The Mediterranean is in turmoil. Squadrons patrol, ports change allegiance, and populations endure requisitions necessary for the war effort. Control of islands like Corcyra, Corfu, or key ports like Methone is an essential preliminary before a major naval confrontation. Operations are conducted under the pressure of climate and the threat of political upheaval that could shift the loyalty of allies. In the background, the inevitable confrontation between Octavian and Antony's forces with the fleet of Alexandria for Mediterranean supremacy looms. Before the battle, both camps aim to secure their positions, cut off vital access points, and reinforce their supplies. The preceding months are marked by preliminary maneuvers, the capture of Corcyra by Octavian, Agrippa's actions, increasing disorganization in Antony's camp, and strategic debates on a land battle or maritime retreat. Corcyra, today Corfu, located off the northwest coast of Greece, is an important advanced post, controlling the entrance to the Adriatic Gulf and offering natural shelters for ships. In the spring of 32, before Christ, Octavian deployed his fleet in nearby waters to seize it, establishing a beachhead for a maritime blockade against Mark Antony, stationed further south. The conquest was neither long nor bloody. The inhabitants, loyal to the Republic, now fear the military power of Octavian. His well-equipped army and fleet threaten local communities who live from trade, fishing, and maritime craftsmanship. Having already suffered from Roman civil wars, they do not wish to fight for a faction whose goals seem distant to them. The notables prefer to negotiate their surrender to preserve their assets. Octavian quickly installs his troops without much opposition. The ancient fragmentary sources describe a rapid transition of local power to his representatives. He orders the construction or restoration of light fortifications suited for occupation. He grants the island the status of a support base, a gathering and maintenance place for the fleet, to store provisions and equipment for future operations. Corcyra thus becomes a major asset. It allows surveillance of the strait between the Adriatic and the Ionian Sea and organizes raids against Antony's territories. By establishing himself on Corcyra, Octavian conducts a propaganda campaign with the neighboring Greek cities, emphasizing his role as a defender of Roman traditions and the danger of the alliance between Antony and Cleopatra. His strategists seek to convince local powers that their interest lies in rallying to the Western camp. Corcyra becomes a pivot of political influence, a symbol that Octavian's victory in Greece is imminent. Octavian secures Corcyra's position, the central post of his naval setup, and entrusts his loyal lieutenant Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa with conducting swift operations in the Ionian Sea. Agrippa then commands a formidable fleet equipped with light and maneuverable ships, often built at Misenum or Puteoli, called Liburnians, faster than the traditional large vessels. One of his first targets is the citadel of Methone in Messenia, fortified and close to ports, under the influence of Antony's allies. Agrippa relies on surprise and mobility. He blockades the roadstead, quickly lands troops, and the local forces, taken off guard, do not resist for long. Refusing costly sieges, he achieves quick capitulations. In a few days, he controls Methone and threatens other of Antony's anchorage points in the Peloponnese. By neutralizing this position, Agrippa deprives Mark Antony of a useful port relay, shows the Greek cities that Octavian and he operate on a wide theater from Illyria to the Greek coasts, and frightens Antony's allies, who fear a direct attack. This fear drives some to withdraw, or to secretly make contact with Octavian to avoid reprisals. Beyond the coastal positions, Agrippa hunts down in the Ionian Sea the convoys intended to supply Antony, thanks to a network of informants and the speed of the Liburnians. He intercepts ships before they reach Antony's ports, weakening his supply while reinforcing Octavian's by capturing goods. This contributes to the stocking of provisions and military equipment at Corcyra. Agrippa takes care not to spread his forces far from Octavian, keeping in view the final goal, to strike Antony's fleet at the decisive moment. He maintains constant contact with Corcyra, keeps Octavian informed of his progress, and adapts his movements according to the evolution of power dynamics. Their coordination, the result of a long-standing friendship and cooperation, gives them an advantage over Antony, whose command seems more dispersed. As Octavian consolidates Corcyra and Agrippa conducts destabilizing raids, Mark Antony sees his setup erode. Installed on the western coast of Greece, he faces severe logistical difficulties threatening his army's cohesion. In 32 before Christ, several factors combine: lack of provisions, disease outbreaks in the camps, and defection of some key allies. Fevers particularly affect the marshy areas near the Gulf of Ambracia, where humidity favors the spread of deadly diseases for already exhausted soldiers. Doctors, poorly trained in contagion, can treat certain symptoms, but epidemics spread in overcrowded and poor camps. The transport of traditional remedies also faces terrestrial transport difficulties, with the routes of Epirus and Acarnania being poorly maintained and local resources already exploited. Antony also has to manage the scarcity of food. Stocks from Egypt are partially depleted, requiring him to turn to nearby Greek cities for supplies. But Agrippa's successes at sea and the threatening presence of Octavian and Corcyra prevent certain convoys. The tax pressure imposed on allies in conquered localities worsens the situation. To finance the campaign and maintain a large army, Antony demands heavy contributions. These communities, already impoverished, slow down deliveries or show little cooperation. Defections manifest here. Kings and local chiefs, once loyal to Antony, now hesitate. The kings of Galatia in central Anatolia, or of Heraclea Pontica in Bithynia, who supported Antony with troops and subsidies, now prefer to withdraw. Some negotiate secretly with Octavian, hoping to save their kingdoms after the war. Lack of confidence, economic pressures, and fear of an imminent disaster against Octavian explain these departures, which weaken Antony and undermine the soldiers' morale. In his letters, Mark Antony reassures the regional powers by reminding them of his impressive fleet and the financial support of Queen Cleopatra. He emphasizes the importance of staying united to block Octavian's path, but his army suffers from shortages, morale declines, officers are worried, and the western region of Greece does not lend itself to a long defense without stable supplies. Some lieutenants think they need to break the stalemate, surprise Octavian, either by engaging in a land battle or bypassing his forces to reach Egypt. The leadership of Antony's army is ensured by several key figures. Mark Antony remains the nominal leader, bolstered by his victories in the east. Beside him, Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, wants to protect her kingdom and assert her political position. The general staff also includes Roman officers and experienced generals like Cneidius Crassus, recognized for his skill in commanding ground forces. During the war council, opinions differ. Cneidius, commanding part of the legions, advises forcing a battle on land. He recalls that Antony's legions are numerous and battle-hardened, capable of rivaling those of Octavian. Fighting on land would circumvent Agrippa's naval superiority, whose sea attacks are deadly. Moreover, Roman soldiers prefer terrestrial confrontation, where the cohesion of a legion can turn the tide of victory. A poorly engaged naval battle would compromise retreat, whereas a well-prepared land battle can contain or wear down the enemy before a possible escape. Cleopatra, concerned about Egypt's fragility, advocates for a swift return by sea. She knows that the Ptolemaic treasure, Antony's main financial resource, could dwindle if the war prolongs in Greece. Egypt, rich in wheat and endowed with advantageous topography like the vast Nile Delta, favors staunch defense. She also believes that the morale of the fleet, partly composed of Egyptian sailors and soldiers, would be better navigating towards their homeland than in unsanitary camps. She insists that the naval option be maintained, set sail, force the southern passage against Octavian's fleet, and rally Alexandria to rebuild forces in a favorable environment. The positions of Cneidius and Cleopatra deeply divide Antony's entourage. According to ancient testimonies, he hesitates between these strategies. He fears leaving his land army exposed to Octavian, but knows that well-defended Egypt is a major asset. Some pro-Roman officers distrust Cleopatra's influence, believing her motivated by Egyptian interests without regard for Rome. Others admit that the Egyptian fleet is crucial. A quick crossing to Egypt could risk disaster if Octavian's fleet pursues Antony. His heavy ships are less maneuverable than Agrippa's. Fleeing could lead to skirmishes where Antony would lose his vessels. The weather in the Ionian Sea, especially with autumn approaching, is dangerous for heavy convoys. Dominant winds like the Maestral hinder the navigation of Egyptian galleys. The land battle considers Octavian's advancement as he controls Corcyra and can transport reinforcements by sea. Days pass without a decision. Antony's scouts report regular movements of Octavian's fleet, ready to attack. Rumors suggest that Agrippa has built more effective naval weapons, developed new rams, and perfected the grapnel to immobilize Antony's heavy ships. His officers, worried, note the lack of immediate technological response and will have to rely on the mass of their fleet, frontal ramming, and the strength of onboard catapults to maintain the advantage. In the absence of clear directives, tensions rise. Cneidius urges a march to confront Octavian on land, proposing defensive lines to force battle under favorable conditions. Cleopatra, on the other hand, insists on a major naval maneuver, even if it means risking a crossing of the Ionian Sea. The officers, divided, form factions. Mark Antony, influenced by Cleopatra, often leans toward the maritime solution, but fears being isolated at sea, while his legions remain in Greece. A command conference is held near Actium, whose gulf faces the Ambracian Peninsula. Antony proposes a mixed plan, to set out by sea while positioning a land force to cover the retreat. But logistical difficulties, fever ravaging the troops, and the looming threat of Agrippa's ships complicate matters. In a heavy atmosphere at the start of 31, before Christ, both armies established positions around the Gulf of Ambracia, surrounded by unhealthy marshlands. Naval operations in the Ionian Sea, dominated by Octavian and Agrippa, have weakened Mark Antony. Camped in Epirus and along the Greek coasts, he faces supply issues and internal divisions. The question remains whether he can break out with his fleet and men, or if he will be forced into direct land combat. In this inevitable war, decisions made or delayed will weigh heavily on the outcome. For now, neither Antony's fleet nor his army has been destroyed, but Octavian's forces are gaining a decisive edge. The fragile balance of this confrontation will shape the events to come, whose outcome will soon unfold between the waves and shores of Aetolia and Epirus. On September 2nd, 31st, before Christ, in the waters off the Actium Peninsula, a decisive naval battle of Roman antiquity takes place. For a modern global audience unfamiliar with the event, it is a clash between the forces of Octavian, Rome's future emperor Augustus, and the fleet of Mark Antony, supported by Cleopatra VII. This confrontation in the Ionian Sea will shift Rome toward imperial rule, as two great military leaders face off. The location is the Actium Peninsula, a rocky spur in the Ionian Sea in northwestern Greece. It marks the entrance to the Gulf of Ambracia, about 40 kilometers long, bordered by marshy plains and low hills, offering natural shelter for ships seeking protection or strategic positioning. Controlling this gulf means dominating the sea routes, connecting the Adriatic to Greece, crucial in the 1st century before Christ for supplies of grain, manpower, and resources. Whoever blocks the gulf traps the enemy inside, preventing escape or a tactical bypass. The Mediterranean climate, hot and dry at the end of summer, is marked by regular winds like the maestral, a northwesterly wind that influences naval maneuvers. The fleets relied on sails, rowers, and favorable weather, which would play a crucial role on September 2nd. On both sides of the Gulf, each camp establishes fortified encampments. Antony sets up on the southern coast, with palisades and land troops near the shoreline. Octavian holds outposts along the coast and on the peninsula to monitor enemy movements, tighten the net, and restrict navigation and enemy resupply. The Battle of Actium pits two major naval forces against each other with distinct tactics and ships. On Octavian's side, command is shared between him and his admiral Agrippa. His fleet consists mainly of light, agile ships, Liburnians, biremes, and some triremes. The Liburnian, a lightweight vessel of Illyrian origin, is fast and highly maneuverable. Agrippa's fleet is equipped with the harpax, a grappling weapon launched by catapult, allowing boarding without destabilizing the ship. His forces include 200 to 250 ships, mostly small to medium-sized, crewed by seasoned sailors experienced in coastal skirmishes and rapid interventions. Antony, supported by Cleopatra, commands around 230 heavy ships, quadriremes, quinqueremes, and massive lepararii. These large warships have thick hulls and high decks, ideal for launching projectiles from above. Their crews include mercenary rowers paid by Cleopatra, who funds the campaign with gold from the Lagid Kingdom. However, the ship's size makes them hard to maneuver and slow to turn, though their firepower and resistance to ramming are strong advantages in close combat. maintaining cohesion between Roman, Egyptian, and Eastern auxiliary forces remains a major strategic challenge. The order of battle thus pits a light fleet focused on speed and boarding actions against a heavy fleet strong in frontal confrontation. Agrippa relies on innovation and rigor to surprise the enemy, while Antony counts on mass, the initial shock, and the financial support of Cleopatra. Manövrering. Antony moves out in a single line, heavy ships in the center. On the morning of September 2nd, Antony's forces break Octavian's blockade. The admiral orders the heavy quinquiremes and quadriremes to form a wide front line at the exit of the Ambracian Gulf to force the battle, preventing Octavian from using his light ships to encircle his ranks. Under the sun, the monumental hulls form a floating rampart. Antony hopes to dissuade Octavian from approaching and force him to fight head-on. Agrippa feigns retreat, stretches the left wing of the adversary. Octavian and Agrippa spot Antony's tactic. Taking advantage of the slow pace of the heavy ships, they launch several fast squadrons against Antony's left wing, simulating a frontal attack. The light vessels fire a few volleys, then retreat. Antony's left wing moves away and stretches, creating gaps between the center and the edge of the fleet, which Agrippa wants to exploit to isolate the heavy ships. Noon. The winds change. Octavian orders encirclement by fast Liburnians. The northwesterly breeze, the maestral, strengthens, hindering the maneuvering of Antony's heavy ships. Octavian has his Liburnians circle around Antony's formation to initiate an encirclement. The light ships slip into the spaces left by the opposing galleys. Antony's men try to close ranks but struggle to maneuver. If the encirclement succeeds, Antony's fleet risks being trapped against the coast or driven back into the Gulf, with no possibility of retreat. PM. Cleopatra breaks the line and heads south with 60 ships, with a purple sail raised as an agreed signal from Antony. The Queen, behind the battle line, takes the initiative to head out to sea with about 60 ships. The purple sail is a prearranged signal to retreat to avoid total annihilation. Some think she mainly seeks to protect the Egyptian treasure. This move causes panic in Antony's fleet. He leaves the center to join Cleopatra, causing disorganization. Some continue fighting, others flee south. PM. Internal fires on Antony's heavy ships. Agrippa uses incendiary weapons like pitch beacons and flaming arrows to break resistance. The wooden hulls, ropes, and tarred sails catch fire easily. The use of the harpax immobilizes certain enemy ships, facilitating shooting and boarding. The flames and smoke demoralize Antony's men, already affected by their commander's retreat. PM. Canidius abandons the shore. Antony's command disintegrates. Canidius Crassus, the head of the land forces, realizes defeat and leaves his post on the shore, leaving the infantry without support. Without directives or Antony at their head, the soldiers hesitate between surrender and dispersal. Antony's chain of command collapses, ending the Battle of Actium. Some sporadic fighting may have lasted until the evening, but the crucial moment is between 2 p.m. and 5:30 p.m., when Antony moves south and his officers, faced with Agrippa's methodical aggression, lose all strategic coherence. The Battle of Actium, rich in twists and turns, inspired many ancient chroniclers, including Plutarch and Cassius Dio, sometimes influenced by Augustan propaganda or romantic traditions surrounding Antony and Cleopatra. who transmitted several anecdotes forming the legend of this event. Plutarch, in his Life of Antony, describes the Roman general sitting silent, staring at the empty sea after the rout of his fleet, illustrating the moral defeat of a man once courageous, now powerless. After the victory, Octavian minted denarii, commemorating actium with maritime symbols like the dolphin or the trident. These coins reinforced Octavian's military legitimacy as the victor over traitors and defender of Rome against the Eastern corrupter. This propaganda portrayed Antony as a slave to Oriental passions, manipulated by Cleopatra, and forged the image of Octavian's unquestionable victory over a morally weakened rival. The count of losses remains a matter of debate, but an estimated 5,000 of Antony's men died, including sailors, soldiers, and officers, sacrificing themselves to enable his escape. On Octavian's side, losses were fewer, with about 300 captured or missing at sea, a low number relative to the clash. The immediate toll is also measured in morale and psychological impact. Actium is the ancient equivalent of a Waterloo, a decisive day that shifts the balance. In a few hours, Antony loses his military credibility and the strategic advantage tied to his eastern fleet. On a tactical level, Octavian's technological superiority and better coordination of forces won the decision. Lightweight ships maneuvered nimbly, exploiting the adverse wind against the enemy, and used the harpacks to board or block slower enemy ships. Antony's fatal error, leaving the battlefield prematurely to follow Cleopatra, destroys any hope of a turnaround. Without a structured target to confront, Octavian's forces attacked the remnants of the fleet in disarray. Beyond the numbers, Actium crystallizes the notion that Octavian defended Roman identity against the foreign influence of the East, an argument later used to establish his power. In the ensuing months, a propaganda campaign praised Octavian's heroism and Antony's betrayal. For the Mediterranean world, Actium is not just a military episode. It marks the end of a balance between East and West. The forces engaged, alliances broken, the flight of Antony and Cleopatra to Egypt, and Octavian's victory signal a major political restructuring. Actium, brief yet intense, seals the fate of the Republic in its transition to empire. On this late day of September the 2nd, 31st, before Christ, a few hours of confrontation upend history. The defeated triumvir departs in disgrace, and the future Augustus, buoyed by his victory, prepares to reshape the political and institutional order of the Mediterranean basin. Militarily, Actium illustrates the importance of logistical and climatic factors in ancient naval warfare. Beyond that, it testifies to the power of propaganda and how a victorious narrative shapes collective memory for centuries. In the twilight of the Battle of Actium, on September 2nd, 31st, before Christ, Mark Antony finds himself in a desperate situation. The fleet he gathered has disintegrated off the promontory of Actium, on the western coast of Greece. The heavy ships he relied on to break through enemy lines failed to maneuver against the lighter, faster ships of Agrippa, Octavian's admiral. When Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, raised anchor during the fight, setting her purple sail as a signal for retreat, Antony had no choice but to follow, attempting to save what remained. A profound sense of defeat grips the troops. The Battle of Actium lasted only a day, but its psychological impact is immense. All ambitions of power over Rome and the East seem annihilated. The officers who supported him doubt the victory. The surviving galleys scatter, and many rowers, exhausted or wounded, no longer hold course. The most affected sink into terror, fearing capture by Octavian's forces, known for their inflexibility. It is in this confusion that Mark Antony and Cleopatra begin their long retreat by sea to Egypt, the last bastion of their alliance. They narrowly escape Roman patrols, equipped with light ships, attempting to intercept them. Antony's navy knows certain secret passages, and Cleopatra, with her immense funds, ensures minimal supplies to continue the journey. Contrary winds lengthen their route, and storms loom on the horizon. Demoralized officers doubt Antony's ability to reverse the course of events. Some prefer to commit suicide rather than be captured and humiliated. Several collective suicides are reported even before reaching a safe port. Despite this tragic climate, Antony and Cleopatra keep hope of regaining a foothold in Egypt, where the wealth of the kingdom could offer them a reprieve. The Ptolemaic Egypt is then coveted for its grain silos, treasures, and its commercial access to the Red Sea. Cleopatra VII, the divine sovereign according to the dynastic cult, knows that control of this region is vital for Rome. She hopes to take advantage of the geographical distance to reorganize her forces. Antony, for his part, broods over his failure. He had promised victory and rewards to the soldiers, but must now ask for their ultimate loyalty with few prospects. Octavian, the future Augustus, wastes no time. As soon as he is certain of Antony's naval defeat, he orders his troops to advance through the Ionian Sea and by land routes across mainland Greece. His reputation for invincibility after Actium opens doors for him. The Greek cities, weary of plundering and dependent on Roman grain, prefer to rally to him rather than risk his wrath. Athens, strategic in its cultural prestige and commercial role, has depended on Roman goodwill for decades. Octavian promises clemency and favors if it submits quickly. The city, aware of the imperial realpolitik, welcomes him without resistance. Upon his entry, Octavian orders the preservation of temples and monuments, avoiding the fate of other recalcitrant cities, which underscores his magnanimity and aims to ensure local support. However, a few isolated localities in Epirus and Macedonia still show sympathies for Antony. Small groups of Antonian veterans hope for a turn of events, but these resistances are weak in the face of Octavian's power. Quickly, surrender becomes the only option for hesitant cities. With winter approaching, Octavian prepares the final campaign towards Alexandria, the refuge of Antony and Cleopatra. The preparations are entrusted to Agrippa, an expert in naval routes. The Mediterranean, mare nostrum for the Romans, becomes the natural corridor for the invasion. Octavian presents this campaign not as a conquest, but as the bringing to heel of a perjured general and the Oriental witch who enchanted him, to rally opinion in Italy and the Western Mediterranean. He portrays Antony and Cleopatra as enemies of the state and traitors to Rome. Octavian's armies impose their authority on strategic coastal positions. The local commanders, frightened, mostly surrender. The clemency displayed by Octavian, especially towards those who submit quickly, plays a decisive role. He promises the maintenance of local elites and the continuity of a certain economic order, provided they pledge immediate allegiance and accept Roman garrisons. A parade of Greek notables then welcomes his envoys to negotiate sometimes advantageous capitulations. Octavian recalls that more than 20 cities rallied to him at the first approach without bloodshed. For Antony, this phenomenon deepens the isolation of his camp and prevents him from recruiting troops on the road to Egypt. When Antony and Cleopatra reach Alexandria at the beginning of 30th before Christ, the city still retains the splendor of its Hellenistic past. Founded by Alexander the Great in the 4th century before Christ, Alexandria is a beacon of knowledge and commerce. Its great library, among the largest in the ancient world, attracts scholars, while the lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders, guides ships to this cosmopolitan port. It is amidst these monuments that the final act of the Antonian tragedy is played out. Aware of the threat, Cleopatra mobilizes the remaining resources. She consolidates the port defenses, strengthens the city walls, and orders the assembly of the last pieces of artillery. The population prepares for a difficult siege. However, the enthusiasm is mixed. After several defeats, many think the alliance with Antony has caused more misfortunes than benefits. Some fear Roman control over the city's treasures and a brutal sacking at the end of the war. Yet, the presence of the queen and the fear of reprisals push the majority of Alexandrians to cooperate. On Antony's side, disillusionment is evident. Officers returning from Alexandria report the degraded moral state of the troops, who see the retreat to Egypt as a hopeless flight. Cleopatra's coffers, although filled, are not enough to raise an army equivalent to Octavian's legions. Foreign allies, understanding that Rome's power is inevitable, detach themselves, believing that a frontal confrontation with Octavian can only lead to a costly failure. Egypt then appears more as an isolated refuge than as a springboard for reconquest. When Octavian approached the coasts of Egypt, he had prepared his troops for a land and sea operation. He first advanced along the Libyan coast to take the poorly defended Egyptian fortresses. Then, from Pelusium, in the eastern delta of the Nile, the legions moved up the coast towards Alexandria, securing supplies through vast maritime convoys. The strategy was aimed at depriving the capital of any exits and supplies, forcing it to surrender. In preparation for the final assault, Antony, aware of his inferior forces, devised a desperate plan. He attempted to arrange with Cleopatra for a naval sortie to break the blockade and escape into the open sea to join possible supporters. But Octavian's grip tightened too quickly. Antony's galleys were neutralized by the Roman fleet. On land, the Egyptian garrisons held little against the legions reinforced by the prestige of Actium. Skirmishes multiplied around Alexandria, plunging the city into anxiety. Antony's attempts to stir patriotic fervor or seek assistance clashed with reality. Few allies dared to openly support him. They knew that Octavian would punish the losers. Several regional leaders, once loyal, had already defected to save their crowns, sending emissaries to Octavian to negotiate their clemency. In Alexandria, notables, weary of instability, hoped that a regime change would bring peace and prosperity. The siege quickly turned into a blockade. Alexander the Great wanted to make Alexandria a commercial and scientific hub, but during this troubled time, the city was surrounded. Markets emptied, and grain prices soared. The royal reserves fed the garrison and the population for a time, but if Octavian persisted, the situation would become unbearable. In a city threatened by famine and fear, Mark Antony sought to rally his followers, while Cleopatra pondered turning to diplomacy to negotiate. At the beginning of the summer of 30 before Christ, the Roman pressure reached its peak. Octavian could launch the final assault at any moment. His strategy proposed that Cleopatra surrender in exchange for her life and perhaps the crown. He was mainly concerned with eliminating Antony, whom he accused of rebellion against Rome. But in the long term, Octavian planned to place Egypt under direct administration. Cleopatra, aware of this duplicity, hesitated. She conferred with Egyptian dignitaries to deliver Antony, but either he learned of it or suspected it. Their relationship, once passionate and political, became strained. Ancient sources report a profound sadness uniting the lovers in the face of the inevitable outcome. Antony's downfall accelerated when Roman troops and Octavian's mercenaries broke through the defenses. Street fighting erupted, spreading panic. Antony led a final charge with loyalist cavalry to repel the attackers, without success. Morally wounded and exhausted, he withdrew to the palace without an escape. Feeling betrayed, perhaps by the rumor that Cleopatra had committed suicide, he chose to take his own life. Accounts vary, but the most widespread tradition says he impaled himself with his sword, or asked a loyal follower to do so before being finished off. Plutarch and other historians emphasize the image of a once proud man, crumbling under defeat and alleged betrayal. Cleopatra was still alive. Devastated by Antony's death, she locked herself in her mausoleum, which was under construction, with a few attendants. When Octavian entered the sanctuary, he tried to persuade her to accompany him to Rome to be displayed as a war trophy. Conscious of the humiliating fate, paraded in chains through the streets, she refused. It is then that the famous snake episode, the venomous asp, occurred. According to the most widespread account, the queen was bitten by the snake hidden in a basket of figs or a vase, ending her life while maintaining sovereignty over her fate. Some modern historians doubt the veracity of the snake's scene, suggesting she might have ingested a combination of poisons or inflicted a fatal wound on herself. However, the myth of the asp remains firmly entrenched in the collective imagination, symbolizing Cleopatra's determination to choose death over captivity and to etch her name in legend. With the demise of Antony and the Queen of Egypt, the final chapter of the Ptolemaic dynasty, which originated from Alexander's generals, comes to an end. Egypt, now a Roman province, prepares to blend into the nascent empire. The simultaneous suicide of the two lovers takes on a dramatic dimension. It marks the end of the independent Hellenistic kingdoms that rivaled or negotiated with Rome. In the eyes of the Roman public, the end of Cleopatra, the last queen of a Greco-Macedonian lineage, confirms the definitive victory of the new order led by Octavian. The official propaganda presents the disappearance as the legitimization of the conquest, evoking the Eastern corrupter and the man blinded by passion, both set against the Roman virtues of austerity and duty. After the couple's disappearance, Octavian enters Alexandria as a victor. He prevents any sacking, preferring to recover the palace's treasures and Egypt's resources intact. The city, even in defeat, remains a cultural and economic jewel. Octavian orders the preservation of the lighthouse, the temples, and the scholarly institutions. The stakes are clear. By integrating Egypt, the future Augustus, a title he would adopt in 27 before Christ, ensures the control of a critical granary to feed Italy and nurtures the ambition to extend trade routes towards the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. The last supporters of Antony in Alexandria no longer dare to raise arms. Some officers receive a pardon on condition they transfer their loyalties, while others flee into the desert. For the population, the essential is that Octavian avoids a massacre and ensures the continued functioning of Alexandria. Symbolically, he announces that the city will be under the direct authority of the emperor, marking the difference with provinces managed by the Senate. Thus, Egypt becomes the private domain of Augustus, a strategic place for the decades to come. It is in this somber and future-bearing climate that the tragedy of Antony and Cleopatra comes to an end. Their disappearance illustrates the end of an era marked by personal ambitions and confrontations between generals, heirs of Caesar, or rivals. With Antony's death, disappears a major protagonist of the Roman civil wars. With Cleopatra's extinction, a part of the Greek heritage in the East fades. United by love, mixing politics and passion, they leave a lasting imprint in the collective imagination, a symbol of doomed lovers caught in the struggle between Rome and the Orient. In the following months, Octavian solidifies his power. He reforms the city, reorganizes the country, and places garrisons in key locations. The secured treasure of Egypt finances the future Augustus's projects to reward his veterans, build monuments in Rome, or expand the empire. In the memory of the Romans, Actium remains the decisive battle, while the fall of Alexandria in 30 CE before Christ ends the civil wars and paves the way for the Principate. The flight to Egypt and the death of Antony and Cleopatra reflect the brutal end of a struggle that surpasses a simple Roman dissension. It embodies the confrontation between an expanding empire and the last great Hellenistic monarchy. For contemporaries and later generations, this denouement sums up Rome's irresistible rise in the Mediterranean. When the gates of Alexandria open for the last time to Octavian's legionnaires, history decisively shifts in favor of the new master of the West. Some vestiges of the power of the Ptolemies will remain, but the era of the king pharaohs closes with the tombs of Antony and Cleopatra. From this tragic conclusion remains a lesson often commented upon. Passion, politics, and ambition can clash with the most pragmatic geopolitical reality. Antony and Cleopatra, linked by the heart and common interest against Rome, could not overturn a state whose military and economic power was unmatched. Their exile to Alexandria, and then their death, mark the end of a chapter where it was still believed that the prestige of Alexander the Great, embodied by his city, could contest Rome's growing pragmatism. Thus ends the flight to Egypt and the twilight of Antony, an intimate and political episode that closes an era of upheavals. In a few hours of siege, the destiny of two legendary figures collapses, while a new era is born, carried by Octavian's determination, soon Augustus, and the administrative and military machine of the Roman Empire. The Mediterranean, almost entirely under Roman control, will never be the same, and the ancient world turns a decisive page. The naval battle of Actium on September 2nd, 31st, before Christ, had a major impact on contemporaries and subsequent generations. The victory of Octavian and his general Agrippa ended the rivalry between this young heir of Julius Caesar and the couple Mark Antony Cleopatra VII, Queen of Egypt. This triumph led to a profound reorganization of the Roman state and a reshaping of diplomatic balances in the Mediterranean and beyond. Beyond the elimination of Antony and Cleopatra, this victory marked the advent of a new regime in Rome and the affirmation of Roman power in the East. Trade exchanges towards east of the Nile and all the way to India experienced a spectacular boom. With civil war set aside, a relative order settled in the Mediterranean, dispelling doubts about Rome's future in favor of unprecedented stability. This shift allowed the transition from a weakened republican system to a new type of government, the Principate. We will examine three key points here: the founding of the Principate and the role of Octavian, who became Augustus, the reorganization of the Orient with the annexation of Egypt, and the redistribution of economic and administrative cards, as well as the geopolitical repercussions, notably peace with the Parthians and the changes on the trade routes to Asia. The victory at Actium does not merely mark the end of a civil war, but inaugurates an imperial era that will durably shape history. The first major consequence of Octavian's victory at Actium is the disappearance of internal oppositions that had undermined the Roman Republic for several decades. After the death of Caesar in 44 before Christ, Rome went through a turbulent period marked by successive civil wars. The powers held by consuls, proconsuls, or provincial governors were no longer balanced by a weakened Senate, incapable of containing the ambitions of military leaders. The elimination of Mark Antony, a central actor on the political scene, freed Octavian from his major competition and allowed him to progressively impose his authority. Despite his youth, he understood that he could not rule in the form of a declared dictatorship. He had his power accepted by cultivating the illusion of a republican restoration, all while granting himself unprecedented control. In 27 before Christ, Octavian appeared before the Senate and officially returned his extraordinary powers. This spectacular gesture, perfectly coordinated, prompted the senators to entrust him with new lifelong charges and to bestow upon him the honorary name Augustus, meaning the venerable or the august, with a quasi-religious resonance. His power, subtly disguised, avoided the detested titles of king or dictator by a nobility attached, at least in appearance, to republican principles. In practice, Augustus combined tribunician power, which allowed him to protect the people and exercise a veto right, and proconsular imperium, which granted him supreme command of the armies and provinces. The Senate persisted, but remained clearly subordinate to Augustus's power. This new system took the name of the Principate, in reference to Augustus himself, termed Princeps Senatus, the first of the Senate, suggesting the perpetuation of republican traditions. In parallel, Augustus undertook reforms to rationalize the government of the provinces. Under the Republic, the appointment of governors often relied on political maneuvers. Henceforth, the strategic provinces where legions were stationed came under his direct control. This was the case for Syria, certain parts of Hispania, and more significantly, Egypt, which acquired a special status. Pacified provinces like Sicily, Achaia, or the proconsular Africa remained under senatorial administration, but under stricter rules. This distribution aimed to deprive the Senate of the military strength of provincial armies and to prevent the rise of new, strong men. In Rome, Augustus established a Praetorian Guard tasked with protecting him and intervening in case of conspiracy. Selected among the best soldiers, the Praetorians formed an elite, better paid, housed in Rome, with barracks and modern equipment. This creation responded to a need for internal stability after the divisions of the Civil War and marked a turning point. For the first time, a permanent military body was stationed in the capital, which the Republican tradition rejected. Ultimately, this guard would play a considerable political role, becoming an arbiter of imperial successions. Auguste also undertakes a major administrative overhaul. He implements a more rigorous census to adapt taxation to the actual demographics. He relies on agents, procurators, prefects, who report directly to him, bypassing senatorial patronage. The public treasury is now supplemented by an imperial treasury, fiscus, under his control. These reforms ensure more efficient management, the loyalty of agents, and the solidity of the state's resources. On the religious front, he restores numerous cults and temples, positioning himself as a guarantor of tradition while cultivating a quasi-divine status around himself. Supported by the prestige of Actium, these innovations establish a monarchic-type empire, disguised under a republican facade. The Principate, presented as a return to order rather than an absolute power grab, appeals to a population weary of civil wars. This support is active. The Roman people, Italian notables, and provincial elites see it as a way to stabilize their situation and ensure their prosperity. Merchants hope to increase their incomes thanks to secure roads and the end of plundering. Officers feel safer in a unified army. Thus, after Actium, Europe and the Mediterranean regions enter the Pax Augusta, a long cycle of relative peace under August and his successors. The naval victory at Actium leads to a profound redrawing of the eastern space. The most striking moment is the annexation of Egypt in 30 years before Christ, when Octavian's troops entered Alexandria. Upon the death of Cleopatra VII, who committed suicide shortly after Mark Antony, the Ptolemaic dynasty came to an end. For nearly 3 centuries, Egypt had been governed by the descendants of Ptolemy, one of Alexander's generals. Although influenced by Rome, notably through tributes and diplomatic dependence, it maintained a certain autonomy. Now, August makes it his private imperial province. Only the emperor's express authorization allows a senator or a high-ranking Roman to enter. This fertile country, nourished by the Nile's floods and renowned for its wheat, becomes a major strategic issue. Egypt, the granary of Rome, supports the supply of the capital and other major Italian cities, reducing the risks of a grain crisis. This direct control, bypassing the Senate, illustrates the way August governs the East. He appoints a prefect of Egypt, Praefectus Aegypti, from the equestrian order, lower than the Senate, but close to the prince. This marks a break with the administration of other provinces. This particularity will persist throughout the empire, making Egypt a separate territory directly tied to the sovereign's interests. The takeover of Egypt is accompanied by a redefinition of the status of client kingdoms. In the Near East, Octavian, then Auguste, either deposes or confirms local kings according to their loyalty, establishing a network of vassal states serving as buffer zones against eastern neighbors like the Parthians. This practice, inherited from the Republic, is resumed by August, who centralizes and regulates it legally to prevent any betrayal. The vassals must follow Roman directives, under penalty of being replaced by direct administration. Syria, already a Roman province, sees its garrisons reinforced to secure the eastern frontier. August also quickly realizes the strategic importance of Egypt for trade with Arabia and India via the Red Sea. The maritime routes, known since the Ptolemaic era, become safer thanks to the end of civil wars and the protection of the Roman fleet. Spices, aromatics, precious stones, pearls, and cotton from India arrive more regularly in the Mediterranean. In return, Rome exports wine, ceramics, glassware, and worked metals. This triangular trade links the Italian coast, Alexandria, the Red Sea ports, Berenice, Myos, Hormuz, to the coasts of India, Kerala, Gujarat. Black pepper, highly prized in Rome, becomes emblematic of these exchanges. Alexandria becomes wealthy through the taxation of these goods, and Arab caravaneers, as well as Egyptian intermediaries, play an essential logistical role. Egypt then becomes a strategic crossroads, and Alexandria, a cosmopolitan metropolis animated by the influx of traders from throughout the Mediterranean and Arab world. This commercial expansion, favored by the relative peace established by Augustus, benefits the newly integrated territories. Colonies of veterans settle in strategic areas of the eastern coast, while new outlets open up for local artisans. The caravan routes to Palestine and Syria are secured. This dynamic involves not only luxury products, grains, oil, wood, textiles, and minerals also circulate, enhancing the prosperity of the eastern provinces. Aware of the importance of these routes, Augustus maintains a strong military presence there while avoiding costly wars, especially against the Parthians. The capture of Actium and then the fall of Alexandria thus marked the beginnings of a lasting Roman domination over the Mediterranean East. The transition from a rich but isolated Hellenistic kingdom to a province directly administered by the emperor transforms trade networks, expands the Roman market, and gives the empire a major agricultural asset with the abundance of the Nile. Once a competitor to Rome, Egypt becomes a pillar of its food security and economic growth. The victory at Actium has major consequences on the international political scene, especially in relations with the Parthian Empire, a Mesopotamian power whose capital is Ctesiphon, near present-day Baghdad. The Parthians, under the Arsacid dynasty, had already confronted Rome, notably during the disastrous campaign of Crassus in 53 before Christ at Carrhae. Mark Antony had also tried to contain their influence before getting bogged down in poorly prepared operations. After Actium, Augustus's position is reinforced. Rome is unified and rid of internal competition, while the Parthians remain on the defensive. Aware of the cost of a major expedition, Augustus favors negotiation. In 20 before Christ, he obtains the return of the Roman standards lost at Carrhae, a strong symbol of his authority and restorer of Roman honor. This diplomatic victory confirms the Pax Augusta, where peace takes precedence over war and durably stabilizes the Near East. Rome renounces conquering deep Mesopotamia, while the Parthians prefer trade to a new, ruinous conflict. The collapse of the Egypto-Antonian bloc strengthens Rome's position as the structural foundation of exchanges between the West and the East. The Parthians remain partial intermediaries on the Silk Road, but the conquest of Egypt and the opening of maritime routes via the Red Sea reduced their monopoly on Chinese silk. The Han dynasty, in power in China from 206 before Christ to 9. Anno Domini continues its expansion and maintains indirect exchanges with the Mediterranean basin. Rome establishes more direct contacts by sea with India, which slightly lessens the silk transiting through Parthian Persia and Central Asia. Some land convoys persist, and silk remains a highly coveted luxury product by the Roman aristocracy. Moreover, the Romans also use disjointed routes, bypassing Parthian merchants when they can. Augustus and his successors create support points on the Red Sea to facilitate the supply of Arabian aromatics and Indian spices. The peaceful treaty with the Parthians from 20 before Christ establishes a calmer diplomatic climate, allowing Rome to focus on securing European borders, dominance in the Mediterranean, and provincial taxation. Client kings on the eastern edge of the empire are encouraged to maintain good relations with Parthian rulers, thus avoiding military escalation. Even though major conflicts remain possible, the emperor strictly controls the initiative of wars to preserve the Pax Augusta. Beyond Eurasia, the reorganization of the Middle East and the annexation of Egypt impact the geopolitics of the Red Sea and Northeast Africa. Kingdoms south of Egypt, such as Kush, modern-day Sudan, persist but face Roman pressure in Nubia. Rome intervenes militarily to secure its southern border, especially when disturbances threaten transport on the Nile. Despite treaties like the one with the Candace Queen of Kush, Roman supremacy is asserted. Culturally, Rome integrates the Hellenistic heritage of Egypt, enriching the Greco-Roman identity. Alexandria remains a major intellectual center, with astronomers, doctors, and philosophers, and maintains active ties with the Greek world. The city is the second of the empire and an important hub of Mediterranean intellectual life. Octavian's victory at Actium marks a historical turning point with repercussions in the east, altering the trade routes of silk and spices. The political order reorganized in the Mediterranean influences neighboring kingdoms that adapt their positions in the face of the new dominant power. Historians call this period the imperial moment, where Rome, unified under a victorious leader, becomes the supreme arbiter of conflicts in the region. Alliances are formed in the name of Augustus, and Roman diplomacy gains coherence. Ultimately, the Battle of Actium has multiple consequences. The Roman political system shifts from a republican crisis to a centralized empire around imperial power. The East falls under Roman control or influence, while the Parthians opt for a temporary modus vivendi. Economically, the Eastern Mediterranean and the Red Sea are integrated into a vast trade network extending to the edges of Asia, enriching the empire. The Pax Augusta, the idea of lasting peace, begins to materialize. After decades of conflict, Rome exploits its conquests without immediate new civil wars. At the cost of concentrating power in the hands of Augustus, institutions are redefined, opening new commercial horizons and establishing stability around the Mediterranean. Actium thus becomes the matrix of a new world order, preparing a golden age celebrated by Virgil and Horace. However, this peace remains relative. Military campaigns continue in the north, in Germania and Illyria, and the east periodically experiences tensions with the Parthians and Arab tribes. Despite this, unified Rome maintains its position of strength. The empire's prosperity benefits many Greek cities in Asia Minor, which see public constructions and a pacification of maritime routes. This new system lasts at least 2 centuries under the Julio-Claudians, Flavians, and Antonines, demonstrating the lasting impact of Augustus's victory at Actium. In summary, Actium illustrates how a battle accelerates a regime change in Rome and reconfigures an entire geopolitical space. The unified Roman Empire turns to the east, consolidates its border against the Parthians, extends its influence to India, and modernizes its administration, ensuring a more reliable tax collection and a solid imperial treasury. This power is expressed through personal authority, that of Augustus, master of propaganda, and the myth of a republican restoration to assert his dominance. From Egypt to Judea, through Greece and Asia Minor, few areas escape Rome. The establishment of the Principate, the reorganization of the East, and the new power dynamic with the Parthians are direct legacies of Actium, a one-day victory with profound effects. This historical milestone marks the transition from a fractured republic to a prosperous empire, paving the way for imperial Rome.